So our topic for today is all about behavior and there are four theories. First is Ivan Pavlov, Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov, Thorndike, Watson, of his dinner. So, noon is kuhaan, noon yung pinatukupan na theories na nakuhaan sa behaviorism. So, behaviorism is a systematic approach to understanding the behavior of humans and other animals. It assumes that behavior is either a reflex evolved by the pairing of certain antecedent stimuli in the environment or a consequence of the individual history, including especially reinforcement and punishment consequences, together with the individual's current motivational state and controlling stimulus.
Also, behaviors generally accept the important role of heredity in determining behavior. They focus primarily on environmental elements. Contribution in the development of the behaviorist theory largely came from Pavlov, Watson, Thorndike, and Skinner.
So, ang kanis siya, hindi na mag-explain niya. Katong upan ka theory, mo naman ito na-explain sa behaviorism. So, mo yung behaviorism na sa ito pang-part. First is the classical conditioning.
From therapy to classical conditioning.
So, ang classical conditioning na naginawa ito kay si Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov, a Russian psychologist, is well known for his work in classical conditioning or stimulus substitution. Pavlov's most renowned experiment involved meat, a dog, and a bell. Initially, Pavlov was measuring the dog's situation in order to study digestion. This is when he stumbled upon classical conditioning. So, ang kani si Ivan Pavlov, usa siya kay Russian psychologist na experiment din nila sa ito.
Ito may
experiment sa morning sila before conditioning, during conditioning, or after conditioning. So, ang kaning unconditioned stimulus, mo ni siya ang kanang salivation, maglaway ang hero, makakita sila o pagkaon. Ang mga conditioned stimulus, mo ni ang pagkaon niya. Kaning unconditioned response, mo ni katong maglaway sila. So, makita sila pagkaon, maglaway ang hero. Because, kasi matawa mo.
maglaway mo na.
Kanya, kung pakita ka sa iyo o kuhaan ka ng gamit ka ng neutral stimulus ka ng magamit ka o bell ka na kailangan nila mo'y kuhaan ka magpakaon na sila, di ba? Magamit sila bell. So, pero na yung ipatigog niya, di ka, wakay dang pagkaon, ang kilo, di ka mo respond, kaya rin kung nasa tao, imuhang kuhanan yung plato yung hinatag niyo, maglaway ka mo. Ang ito, panahon-ahon mo na magtutuan.
Dalus.
Ang kaning during conditioning, muna yung si Dama, ang conditional response, katong upa na ang rin mga pagkaon. Ang ero, maglaway si Dama, kanang kita magparin na bell, na sunod na pagkaon. Mo produce sila of salivation. Mo produce ang hero of salivation. Kaya, ang kaning after conditioning, ang hero, naana din sila mo ring ang bell, kaya na sila ang musunod na ng pagkaon na mo na mo produce sila of salivation. Basta ba mo?
Magkana.
Basta ba may
So, what Pavlov did is, diba he was experimenting about the digestive system of the animal. But then, this is an accident niya discovery in which nakakuha siya of conditioning according to the experiment. And the experiment is that moto na si dog na si food of the bell. So, ano yung gigamit niya? But there are also different experiments na show ani na conditioning. So, kaya siya is nasa yung mga stimuli. Ato na siya nitawag unconditioned at first is because the dog at first may salivate siya sa food together with the bell. And so, kung mayroon ka conditioning, balik-balik na siya. Ay kung mag-experiment, balik-balik na siya. So, until na-condition si dog. So, katong first na experiment, na naan si food o si bell, unconditioned pa to. Nahimo na siyang condition. Then, salivate siya even without the food. By only hearing the bell, kung din na condition na dog. Understand?
Yes.
Okay, so that is the theory of Pavlov. Tungkol sa pagbalik-balik, therefore, na condition ng brain or digestive system by dog na salivate siya. Okay, proceed.
Ay, napunta sa Pavlov finding. Nine is the 6 finding. Pavlov finding. First is stimulus generalization. Ang kaning stimulus generalization, kanang ikaw, makuhan sila o na ay sounds o sa ilog ba kay ibasa. Ang ilog na may example sa kay findings na sa experiment ni Pavlov. Ang kaning stimulus generalization, kasi daw mas badani sila o mugamit o kanang mga instrument, sounds, instrument.
Oh,
Mugamit ako sounds, mas madali ka pareha ko na siya. Pareha ko na nato kita malingaw kuan ra ang makita kanang mga visual aid. Dapat mugamit ko tao sounds. Labi na ang kanang iro kanang tingkauna nana sila ikanan magparing og bell mo na ikanan ng tingkauna o kita pod ang atong mga binikanan mo tawag di ba may mga unta ay sa dili sa misa kay mga unta di ba inana pala sa kayo mo ni ang stimulus generalization nya ang kaning extension kuan siya kanang bitaw di ka mo kuan og kanang dito na yung matagal sa kanunay o reward o makabuhat sa maayo kanang kanipiro o kanunay ta mo kuhan musunod pa din o kanunay ta mo matag o reward niya o
what we mean by extinction there is kung i-continue pa itong conditioning ni Pavlov na ay mag-ring sa bell o salivate si dog. Okay? Pero kung repeatedly, magsige ring sa bell, niya wala na yung food, mawala ang siya. That's what we mean by extinction. Cease in response to the bell. So, di na siya mo salivate sa bell, tungkol ka, repeatedly, wala naman po yung food. Okay? Sige. Continue.
then spontaneous recovery ang kaning spontaneous recovery kung ano sila ka na bitaw di na ka magkinahanglan o kanang ibalik-balik pa ni mo ure nag-bell kay kung sa ero pa kay bawa naman sila o unsay pasabot na kay di kuha naman na unsay mong gitudlo niya kadaan ay unsay may pagkita ay tudlo Yes.
So it's the same as addiction and recovery.
Then discrimination. From the word discriminate. Ang kaya discrimination, ganun kang makikota sa kalahian sa duwa. Sa duwa, o sa ino pa ta, makikota. For example, ka na, ay, mo ring ang gano'n, yaway pagkaon, makibaw ang iro sa kalahian sa kanang ring ang gano'n, may magsunod na pagkaon. Then, o sa human behavior po, makibaw ta, o kanang, may kalahian yung mga tao. For example, si Michael Amilo, si Winston, sa may kalahian nila. Bago si Winston. Bago si Michael.
Gabo? Ako gabo?
Mori kalahian, makibaw ta sa kalahian sa mga kasya. Then, higher order conditioning. Ang kaling higher order conditioning. Ano bitaw? Di ka sa iyo pa nagamit sila o bagong mga pamaagi, nagamit iba sa hotel na makikigamit. Then, ang iya nga, nagamit ako si Pablo o music o pag-live. Kunya o pag-live tayo pasigaw niya, kunya di niya ikuha ng kanang music, di mo kuha ng hero. Sila mo kudo sa celebration. Kaya okay pag-gaw niya, di mo kudo mo isa na para makauna or nanay yung pagkaon. Ano siya, ang high order conditioning. So, mag-proceed ako sa John Watson. Kani si John Watson was the first American psychologist to work with Pavlov's ideas. He too was initially involved in animal studies, then later became involved in human behavior research. He considered that humans are born with a few reflexes and emotional reactions of love and rage. All other behavior is learned through stimulus response associations through conditioning. So, ang kani si John Watson, first American psychologist na pareha ni sila ni Pavlov kay Dia, same na ni sila. Nagkuhan o animals, then ikuhan sa human. Then pareha ni sila na bilang sa classical conditioning ni si John Watson o si Ivan Pavlov. Yang kani si John Watson, nani siya experiment. Ang nga sa yung experiment kay Little Albert.
Okay, why do these psychologists study first animals and humans? Isa ba naman niya ka? Okay, so every scientist class, whoever has the experiments that involve animals, they first study their concept or whatever they want to learn into animals before the humans. So then human, we cannot afford to let the humans die with the experiment. Pero kanila kayo, how something or injected, these are conditioned. But generally, we first do the experiment to animals before the humans. Because 100% dapat work na yung hearing before ni mo analyze that. Okay.
So, kanang nakalimot kayo kung patanang yung video sa atong kaiban Pablo para ano sa makasabot siya, makasabtan dyan ninyo insay purpose sa kabuan sa kaiban Pablo na experiment.
Can you see the video? Let's check the video.
To dogs salivating at the smell or taste of food. What he did was, he would bring a bowl of food, meat or whatever the food was for the dog, and gave it to the dog. And the dog salivated because the dog could smell the food. That was an unconditioned response, because salivation is a normal physiological function. As human beings also, we salivate when we smell good food, when mom is cooking and you can smell the food in the kitchen, you feel hungry, you salivate, and that's a normal, natural phenomenon. It is instinctual. It happens automatically. You don't have to think about it, you don't have to make it happen, it just happens. So when the dogs were served with food, they salivated. Every time he brought the bowl of food, the dog salivated, and this shows an unconditioned response. Then, in step 2, what he did was, he would bring the bowl of food for the dog, but at the same time ring a bell. So in one hand he had the food, in the other hand he had a bell which he would ring, and the dogs would come because they could still smell the food and would salivate. Okay? And so he did that over time. This is not a few days, it's not a week, this is over time. Food and the bell together. Normally, when anybody hears a bell, you don't salivate. Okay? But the bell and the food together, the two events happening simultaneously, and the dog salivating prompted a new response in the animals. And that brings us to step 3, which is now he only rings the bell. Pavlov rang the bell and there was no food. The dogs came in running, salivating, because they were conditioned. The sound of the bell and salivation were conditioned. They had learned that the bell means food. And now, if the bell was ringing and there was no food, they were still salivating. Over time, if Pavlov had continued to ring the bell and bring no food, salivation would have stopped. Because the instinctual behavior of salivation has to do with food, not with the sound of the bell. But a very clear and strong point.
Okay, so that was about the theory of conditioning of Pavlov. So we will continue. This is about behavior, huh? So the behavior, when we say behavior, it's not behavior. So it's according to your action, or it's about your that you do.
Sa ero ko po na, makita siya sa diyang amo, or isang kuhan, lagi po, kita po, taon dyan sa lista.
Bless.
Ano ba po bless?
Ano?
Bless? Gani ka sinsin. Guys, fun.
Yes. Okay. If we see our crush, or when I make a certain behavior that we do if we see someone is the apple of our eye. So may simulayan to. Crush. So what you did is the behavior. Any condition behavior na siya kung kay kakanay ko lang.
So, wapan siya natin was gahapon, mag-continue na karon. So, kung ano tag-discuss sa Pavlov, Pavlov, ari na punta sa John Watson. Na ako may nahinunduman sa gahapon na discussion.
Experiment with one.
Inahi sa experience.
Si Ivan Pavlov, mo to sa kuan kanang Russian psychologist niya. Na siya experiment about sa about sa dog. So karon ali na punta sa ka John Watson. Kinsa na to si John Watson? Di ba basa naman na sa hapon. Si John Watson was the first American psychologist. Nabelong sila sa classical conditioning. Pareha ni sila ni Ivan Pavlov na nabelong sa classical conditioning na pareha na sila o ideas o pareha na sila o kanang experiment. So, ang inatasa ka ng experiment ni Juan, John Watson. So, experiment on Albert or little Albert. Ang kani si Albert, mali siya ang bata. Ang experiment niya, kung ano sila na ang animals o human. Ang iyang kuan diri nga animals is a rat, white rat. Now, Watson applied classical conditioning in his experiment concerning Albert, a young child and a white rat. In the beginning, Albert was not afraid of the rat. Ang katong bata, ang una, ito sila mahadlok sa kanang rat. Kanya, kanang, sa katong si Watson naman, nagbuhat na siya o kanang loud noise or kanang napakuratan niya ang bata. Dito ang katong bata, sukad ato, mahadlok na ang bata sa katong rat or mga small animals. Mahadlok na ang bata. Na he soon became conditioned to pair and avoid the rat. Albert touched the rat because Albert was frightened by the loud noise. He soon became conditioned to fear and avoid the rat. Sugad ato nga napakuratan or makakani si Albert mahadlok sa loud noise. Okay. Moto nga kanang pagkuan tali niya kanang ang una jud ana nag-uba na sila duha sa rat o si Albert nag-uba niya sila. Then ang si Watson nagamas daw og loud noise. Pagaman niya loud noise nagulitan sa bata ang rat. Nya mao tong kuan na kuan tali o nausad na sila sa rat. Mao tong nahadlok na sukad ato nahadlok na sila. So ang point ani nga experiment niya kanang Nagawaan niya nga, o this is a mugwat o loud noise, makita dito ang love sa bata o sa rat, makita dito ang ilang pahinugubay. O aling po ta, o buhat po siya o loud noise, may bawaan dito ang rage. Kasabot mo sa ng rage. Kada dito ang mag-date niya, makontrol yung kasupo. Nahibawaan niya dito, or makita niya dito ang love o rage sa iyang experiment. Yes. So, mo to ang John Watson about. So, alin na butas na Thorndike? Edward Thorndike. Ay, would ay, video de ay. Dali ko video. Oh, sa kanya kapawan. Para makapag-ay. Ay,
reached out to touch the rat, scaring Albert and causing... John B. Watson famously claimed that if he were to be given a dozen healthy infants, he could shape them into anything. Doctors, lawyers, artists, beggars, or thieves, regardless of their background or genetic predispositions. First, he completed experiments with 8-month-old Albert, and later he applied his theory when raising his own children. In essence, he applied the scientific method to human psychology, which he called behaviorism. With the little Albert experiment, Watson used the method of classical conditioning to program a baby to be afraid of a lab rat. Earlier, Pavlov demonstrated how conditioning can trigger biological responses that are inherited genetically. Watson hypothesized that we can also instill new behaviors that were not inherited. To conduct the experiment, Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner placed the boy in a room where a white rat was allowed to roam around. First, the boy showed no fear. Then, Rayner struck a steel bar with a hammer every time Albert reached out to touch the rat, scaring Albert and causing him to cry. Eventually, Albert tried to get away from the rat, showing that he had been conditioned to fear the rat. Weeks later, Albert showed distress towards any furry object, showing that his conditioning had not only been sustained, but also generalized. Watson assumed that our behavior is either a reflex evoked by a stimulus or a consequence of our individual history of earlier exposure to reinforcements and punishments paired with our current motivational states and stimuli. Unlike Freud and Jung, he was not interested in thoughts or the mind, because in his opinion, the analysis of actions and reactions was the only way to apply the scientific method to psychology and get objective insight into human behavior. He thought of psychology as an objective branch of natural science. Its goal, the prediction and control of behavior. Like his fellow behaviorists, he believed that intelligence, temperament, and personality are driven by the environment in which the child is raised. Watson published The Psychological Care of Infant and Child. In his book, he advised parents not to touch their children.
Thorndike. So connectionism is a learning theory that explains learning as a result of connection between stimuli and responses. A stimulus is a specific occurrence that spurs action, and a response is a reaction. In connectionism, learning is often visible and apparent. And connectionism is a relatively new learning theory that's connectionism theory gave us the original SR stimuli response framework of behavioral psychology. The main principle of connectionism was that learning could be adequately explained without considering any observable internal states. So, Thorndike theory or connectionism states that learning has taken place when a strong connection or bond between stimulus and response is formed. So, Edward Thorndike has three primary laws: law of effect, law of exercise, and law of readiness. Law of effect is a connection between a stimulus and response is strengthened when the consequences is positive reward, and the connection between the stimulus and response is weakened when the consequence is negative. Kaya kita naman so na for example, law of effect, for example, miring nas case Parang nas iring bitaw. Iring nas case bitaw. cage without lingon sila. Every time I open the cage, I get to eat the yummy fish so fast. Also, I'm gonna repeat it often. More without the experience nila, sa experience nila mo, Mark, mukhang na-effect, Mark, sa experience nila, Mark, wala na. Kita, Mark, handay, mga kita, tagpara ng kanang restaurant na libre, isang libre or librities, mga no. Mark, ito, balik-balik na mo na, law of fake. So, law of exercise. So, law of exercise, the more is our stimulus response, band is practice, the stronger it will be. More the more pradong ano ganito, Ivan Pavlov, ito, katong bell, man ganito, katong bell, kung pating mo, katong bell, Mark ay pagkaon, Mark magbalik-balik ito itong i-record mo na wala exercise, Mark, asanayon, Tagalog, Mark, another day, wala yung law of exercise, Mark, practice na yun. So, law of readiness, the more readiness the learner has to response to the stimulus, the stronger will be the bond between them. So, for example, students, you learn best when you know when you need to learn. For example, every time nga magpa-quiz dito ang instructor kailangan dito magpahiwa sila or magpahiwa kung sabi tayo coverage or paano para ma-ready na yung readiness. So, principle derived from Thorndike's connectionism. Learning requires both practice and rewards. Law of exercise. A series of stimulus, reaction, or response connection can be changed together if they belong to the same action sequence. Law of readiness. Transfer of learning occurs because of previously encountered situations. Intelligence is a function of the number of connections learned. So karon na paano kita karon kung lain theory of behaviorism kang Frederick Skinner. Skinner believes that the stimulus response pattern of conditions behavior. Skinner's 1948 book Golden 2 is about a utopian society based on operant conditioning. He also wrote Science and Human Behavior in 1953. He studied operant behavior, voluntary behaviors used in operating the environment. So, operant conditioning explains how people and animals develop learn response through the repetition of reinforcement and punishment. Operant conditioning is based on result change in overt behavior. Changes in behavior are a result of an individual's response to event stimuli that occurs in the environment. So, analysis the mga parts or reinforcement. It is the key element in Skinner's reinforce is anything that strengthen the desired response. Positive, so kanina is reinforcement na ni positive and negative reinforce. So positive and negative positive reinforce is any stimulus that is given or added to increase the response. Para lang, for example, nalibang sa nalibang sa sound, so ang reaction sa dapat sa kanang pantay sa zero is tagaan sa pagkaon para more butag di ang zero bitaw imbis panisyan more butag tagaan reward tagaan positive reward para more butag para dili man ako. So negative reinforce is any stimulus that results in the increased frequency of a response when it's withdrawn or removed. A negative reinforce is not punishment. In fact, it is a reward. So, paraga po na tong nas kanang brand nas nakita nas YouTuber po ang kanang nalibang yapon pero lahi na po siya negative reinforce reward sila pero ikuhaan na siya nang maan bukod kita sa ira ng diaw para ma-remove kita ang necessary things ang ilang sa kalawasan. So punishment reinforce kay is a consequence intended to result in reduced responses. So positive kanang punishment is kanang brag ko na tong iro kanang nalibang ko nag-iro pero ang ibuhat sa pagbantay kita may mark gunawan sa tagaan mo to punishment. Extinction or non-reinforcement responses is a responses that one not reinforcement are not likely to be repeated. Kanang marami narinig ka ng for example bitaw brana dahil pero yung gibunawan bitaw nga not reinforce not likely to be repeated bitaw di angay ng tuman kay dapat nga mapaton sa iyo kay kanang bitaw malain nag-behavior sa iyo bitaw mahadlok na no. So the next is shaping behavior successive approximation of the behavior are rewarded. Shaping behavior. So next, reinforcement schedule. Once the desired behavioral response is accomplished, reinforcement does not have to be 100%. So fixed interval behavior. Fixed number of correction responses must occur before reinforcement may occur. Next, variable ratio schedules number of correct repetition of the correct response of reinforcement varies. Application of operant conditioning. Practice should take the form of question, stimulus, answer, response frames with which expose the students to the subject in gradual steps. Require that the learner makes response for every frame and receives immediate feedback. Try to assess the difficulty of the question to the response is always correct and positive reinforcement. ensures that good performance in the lesson is paired with secondary reinforcers such as a verbal praise, and good grades. So, Nay, video this one. Principles derived from Skinner's operant conditioning. Behavior that is positively reinforced with recurrent intermittent enforcement is particularly effective. Information should be represented in small amounts so that responses can be reinforced. Shaping. Reinforcement will generalize across similar stimulus generation, producing secondary conditioning. So, Nay,
Edward Thorndike's 3 Laws of Learning, Key Concepts. Edward Thorndike was one of the pioneers of educational psychology. He became famous for formulating the 3 laws of learning in the early 20th century, namely, the law of readiness, the law of exercise, and the law of effect. According to Thorndike, these laws are universally accepted and applied to all kinds of learning. Let me briefly discuss each law below. The law of readiness. According to Thorndike, the primary law of learning is the law of readiness, also known as the law of action tendency. According to Thorndike, this law suggests that learning takes place when an action tendency is aroused through preparatory adjustment, set, or attitude. Hence, readiness in this case means a preparation of action. For Thorndike, if one is not prepared to learn, then learning cannot be automatically instilled in him. For example, unless a person prepares himself to start learning to play guitar, he would not make any progress and eventually not learn playing the guitar at all. The law of exercise. The second law of learning according to Thorndike is the law of exercise. This law suggests that drill or practice helps in increasing efficiency and durability of learning. It is important to note that Thorndike's law of exercise is also referred to as the law of use and disuse, which also suggests that the connections, or bonds made in the brain cortex, are strengthened if the person exercises his brain through, for example, mental games and other intellectual activities. And if the brain is not used or if it does perform regular exercise, then the said connections or bonds are weakened or loosened. Another concrete example where the law of exercise can be applied is the case of learning to type. For one to be able to type faster, then one needs exercise and repetition. Indeed, one needs to practice typing on a regular basis. The law of effect. The third law of learning according to Thorndike is the law of effect. This law states that those behavioral responses that were most closely followed by a satisfying result were most likely to become established patterns and to occur again in response to the same stimulus. Later on, Thorndike modified the law of effect to state that rewards for appropriate behavior.
For example, if the dog poops on a carpet, we can either provide reinforcement so the dog does it again, or punishment so the dog stops. Both reinforcement and punishment can either be positive or negative, which means we have 4 possible ways to teach this dog a lesson. We can draw the 4 options in a table. If reinforcement is positive, we add something pleasant, like a cookie, to increase the likelihood of a behavior. If reinforcement is negative, we still want to increase the desired behavior, this time by removing something unpleasant, like the leash. If punishment is positive, we add an unpleasant response to decrease behavior. When punishment is negative, We also want to decrease behavior, now by removing something pleasant, like the comfy carpet. If we stop any sort of manipulation, the conditioned behavior will eventually disappear again. This is called extinction. Operant conditioning was first studied by Edward L. Thorndike and later made famous by the work of B.F. Skinner. Skinner believed that organisms are doing what they do naturally until they accidentally encounter a stimulus that creates conditioning, which results in a change in behavior. To test this, he placed a rat inside an operant conditioning chamber, which later became known as the Skinner box. Among other things, inside the box was a lever that would release food when pressed. Conditioning happens in a three-term contingency, today known as the ABCs of behavior. A stands for antecedent. The rat accidentally hits the lever that triggers the release of food. B stands for behavior and refers to the response. The rat keeps pressing the lever. C stands for consequence. Food keeps coming out. The strength of the response to the conditioning depends on the schedule of reinforcement. If there is always food after pressing, the rat behaves predictably. If the food is released randomly, the rat behaves erratically like an addict. Skinner, born in 1904, was a professor of psychology and subscribed to behaviorism. He argued that you can only study behavior that is visible, and anything happening only within the mind is either a misconception or irrelevant to science. He thought free will was an illusion because behavior is either random or a reaction to the environment. His work became the foundation for behavioral therapy, military drills, and animal training. You can try this classroom exercise on positive reinforcement. One individual must exit the room. Now, decide on a task which that individual will complete, such as finding a particular book. Then, choose a non-verbal way of reinforcing that task, such as clapping your hands. Invite the person to come back into the room, and let them try and complete the task, but don't give any instructions. Every time they are on the right track in regards to completing the task, clap your hands louder. If they move away from performing the task, reduce your applause or stop it entirely. Once the person understands what they are supposed to do, let them explain the task. Did they get it right?
Like a Hellcat.